Welcome back to the Northwest Elite Spirit. I'm Coach Brian, and this is I Accessed the Power of Dreaming. Once again, from the very beginning of this chapter, Don Juan's advice is very practical, and he talks about Carlos not changing his dietary habits too quickly, because that would make him sick. And that's just true in regular life. If you change your dietary habits too drastically and too quickly, it can put you ill at ease. And then, even the talking and being quiet part of this lesson that Carlos is getting is true if you look at it in politics or in business or in anything else. There is power from noisy talk, from being loud, from being boisterous, from drawing attention to yourself. If you want to draw attention to yourself from powerful people, you speak up when there are powerful people around. And you also have to know when to be silent. And so that's more practical talk or more practical advice. This is another thing that people may just dismiss as woo-woo, magical, mystical talk, but it's more practical advice. And if you believe in mystical things, if you believe in spirits and mystical powers, and you believe as above, so below, as within, so without, then the idea of being loud to draw attention from power, and then being quiet to hide yourself from power is practical knowledge all up and down the line. And just another funny happening is, so now that Don Juan's telling Carlos, now is the time to talk, and you need to talk if you're going to, draw the attention of the power in this area. Carlos has a sense of vacuity. He can't talk. He can't speak. And I think that's another thing that happens to people who just in regular life are seeking some sort of power over their life, or some sense of power, say in their organization or in their peer group. And they have a fear of speaking up and actually doing what it takes to gain some power. And I'm not talking about power like being manipulative or bossing people around or anything like that, but just having say in one's own life. So again, as above, so below. If we don't speak up, we don't get power, even if it's in our own peer groups or say at work or something like that. And Don Juan takes Carlos to this place of power, and Carlos admits, I really don't know what power is. And Don Juan says to him that power is something a warrior deals with. At first, it is an incredible, far-fetched affair. It is hard to even think about. This is what's happening to you now. Then power becomes a serious matter. One may not have it, or one may not even fully realize that it exists, yet one knows that something is there, something which was not noticeable before. Next, power is manifested as something uncontrollable that comes to oneself. It is not possible for me to say how it comes or what it really is. It is nothing, and yet it makes marvels appear before your very eyes. And finally, power is something in oneself, something that controls one's acts and yet obeys one's commands. And it is like that. Like when you first start wanting some sort of power over your life, you have no idea how you can gain power. And I guess in politics or anything else, like you don't really have a sense of how it's done or what it really is. And then once you begin to practice gaining power in your life or in your spiritual life, it becomes a spiritual matter, or it becomes a serious matter. And you may realize that you don't have any, or even fully realize that it exists, yet you have a feeling, like you have a sense that there is something to this, something that maybe you didn't pick up on before. And then it's manifested as something uncontrollable that comes to oneself. So you begin practicing power, and even when you're like intentionally practicing it, you may not get any results. But then from just the sheer practice, from the repetition of it, there'll come times where by surprise you will have some sort of influence over the things around you. And then it's like a second thought that, oh, I was practicing that thing that I've been looking at, and it just kind of came out and appeared. And so it's something uncontrollable. And yeah, like you will start to notice that marvels may appear, like you'll have a certain influence over the things around you. Maybe it's just a conversation with a person where you just, like I've had a couple of these lately where somebody was just seemingly totally cold and cut off and just really grumpy, and I was able to turn them around entirely, and then it was hard to get them to like be quiet and cooled off towards me. Seemed like they wanted to hang out all day, where at first it was just they wanted nothing to do with me. And then also like like finding money, like when I'm trying to find, like I found money, I've like jumped up on an inner tube and looked down to the bottom of the lake, and I found $5. When I was a kid, I found and these are times that I'm thinking about money, I found a suitcase full of money, though my mom turned it in. Found a wad of money that my mom kept. What else? Found a $5 bill just kind of getting on the freeway, and saw it floating in the wind, and that sort of thing has happened lots of times, like just seeing money floating in the wind when I'm thinking about money. And I think those are the sort of miraculous things that he might be talking about, where you kind of manifest these things into your life. And then it's something in oneself, and something that controls one's acts and yet obeys one's commands. And so there is this, like when you start becoming more powerful, it does, you know it, and you start, I guess, clicking on that level or vibrating on that level. And so the more powerful it's out in the world operating. And yet it's also you, like the power is driving you towards the things that you want to get out of life. And Don Juan asks Carlos if he understands, and Carlos says that he feels ridiculous saying that he does. And he might even actually understand, but he so doesn't want to understand that he says he feels ridiculous saying that he does. So though he does, he feels ridiculous that he does. And then Don Juan says, I'm going to teach you about power. And he wants him to do something very simple. He's gonna teach him to set up dreaming, and he's gonna teach him something very simple, which is just to look at his hands when he's in a dream. And it is a very easy thing, and that is actually like common dream advice, to look at your hands when you're want to set up this control over your dreaming, because you may look at your hand and you may have 6 fingers, or you may have 4 fingers, or you may be able to see through your hand, or you maybe not even be able to count your fingers, because things in dreams are very fluid and glitchy and can come and go. And there's other things you can do. You can look at a clock, and if the time is on the fritz, like changing, and you can't quite get a grip on the time, that's a sign that you're dreaming. Or flicking a light off and on, that's another sign of dreaming. And in my earlier video, I put a link to a scene from a movie called Waking Life, where it's like the whole movie is a dream sequence, where this guy is going from dream sequence to dream sequence. And in one of them, he goes in, meets with some dreamers, and they give him some lucid dreaming advice, and I'll link that again in this one. And so Carlos asks, well, how do you expect me to do that? And Don Juan says, just the way I told you, like, just look at your hands. And there must be more that you could tell me, I insisted. And he shook his head and squinted his eyes, staring at me in short glances, and says, everyone is different. What you call pointers would only be what I myself did when I was learning. We are not the same. We are not even vaguely the same. Maybe anything you'd say would help me. It'd be simpler for you to just start by looking at your hands. And he goes on to tell him the same thing I just said. Everything in your dreams changes when you look at them. And the trick is learning to set up dreaming is not just to look at things, but to sustain the sight of them. And dreaming is real when one has succeeded in bringing everything into focus. And so after reading this chapter, I had a dream about the Gracies. And it was like I was watching a video. It was like I can't remember exactly what it was called. There was a narrator too, like the unreleased footage from the Gracies. And the Gracies were they were standing on drums, beating drums with their geese, and making some chant, which I can't remember right now. It was actually a good one. I had my notepad next to me to write it down, but I never did. But when I was looking at them, they weren't any Gracies that I recognized, and I was able to, and their faces were fluid. They were like moving and changing into different people's faces, and I said to myself, those aren't Gracies, and I was able to put the Gracies' faces on them and then sustain them throughout the dream. So then Carlos is going on to say that he understands what Don Juan is saying, but in a civilized world, people who can't tell the difference, or people who are delusional, mentally ill, are people who can't tell the difference between reality and dreaming. And he doesn't want, he thinks Don Juan's recommending he acts like a crazy man. And Don Juan tells him, leave your civilized world alone. Let it be. No one is asking you to behave like a madman. I already told you, a warrior has to be perfect in order to deal with the powers he hunts. How can you conceive that a warrior would not be able to tell things apart? It says, on the other hand, you, my friend, who know what the real world is, would fumble and die in no time at all if you would have to depend on your ability for telling what is real and what is not. I'm not trying to make you into a sick, crazy man. You can do that all by yourself without my help. And this is another instance where Carlos says that Don Juan is like the most rational, makes the most sense of anybody he knows or who he's ever met. And yet he's saying that Don Juan is asking him to behave like a crazy man for looking at his hands in his dreams. And we all know that in your dreams you can see things in your dreams. Carlos was saying that he's had these vivid dreams and these nightmares, and so he must have been seeing things in his dreams. So you could very well see hands in your dreams, and I'm sure he's even seen his own hands in his dreams. And so bringing them into focus and really, bringing them to the forefront and not letting them blur and not letting them glitch out, that's not such a irrational thing to do. Yet for some reason, Carlos is acting like it is. And this is another instance where Carlos says that Don Juan is like the most rational, makes the most sense of anybody he knows or who he's ever met. And yet he's saying that Don Juan is asking him to behave like a crazy man for looking at his hands in his dreams. And we all know that in your dreams you can see things in your dreams. Carlos was saying that he's had these vivid dreams and these nightmares. And so he must have been seeing things in his dreams. So you could very well see hands in your dreams. And I'm sure he's even seen his own hands in his dreams. And so bringing them into focus and really, I guess, bringing them to the forefront and not letting them blur and not letting them glitch out. That's not such a irrational thing to do. Yet for some reason, Carlos is acting like it is. And he goes on to tell him, like, you don't have to look at your hands. I just said to pick your hands because that's like an easy thing to, I guess, imagine. Looking at your hands. So when things begin to change shape, you must move your sight away from them and pick something else, and then look at your hands again. And so this is something I practiced the other night. I was drifting off, and I was still sleeping in the van, and I was looking out the window, but I began to dream. And how I know I was dreaming is, so I couldn't quite tell at first, but I suspected it. And because I was still in the van and still looking out the window, but everything just changed in a way. So I held up my hands, and that's what my hands were doing. Like I had 6 fingers, and then I had 4 fingers, then I had 7 fingers, and then like they faded. I could see through them and that sort of thing. So yeah, when you're dreaming, things will begin to change. And so I took that advice. I looked away and I looked out the window at like a tree. And when that tree began to get weird, I looked back at my hands again and did that a few times. Then I woke up. Lucid dreaming, it's a weird thing. Your brain starts telling you that these things can't be real, and you snap out of it literally, and you can wake up. So things go on for a little while, and then Don Juan goes into kind of like a trance, and he points at a thing, and he says, "There." And Carlos looks, and they're a little far away, and to him, it looks like an animal. And at first, Don Juan doesn't really like say, yes, that's what it is. He just kind of lets Carlos's imagination go. And so Carlos whispers to Don Juan, "What is it?" Don Juan says, "I don't know. What does it look like to you?" And Carlos says, "It seems to look like a dog." And Don Juan says, "It's too large for a dog." And Carlos gets a little closer, and he thought it was an animal that was asleep, but he was sure that it was a curled up animal, maybe a brown calf. And he whispers to Don Juan that it could be a brown calf, and he says it's too compact for a calf. Besides, its ears are pointed, and the animal shivers. And Carlos notices it's alive and can see that it's breathing, and like it's breathing irregularly. And Carlos says it's an animal that is dying. And Don Juan says, "You're right, but what kind of animal?" And Carlos can't make out the specifics of it. So Don Juan gets a little closer, and Carlos follows. And Don Juan whispers, "Watch out! If it's a dying animal, it may leap on us with its last strength." And so whatever the animal is, it seems to be very close to dying. Breath is irregular, body shaking spastically. And it looked like there was a spasm that actually lifted the animal off the ground. And Carlos hears a noise, like an inhuman shriek, is what he calls it, as the animal stretched. And its legs and claws are more than frightening, nauseating. And the animal tumbled on its side, stretched its legs, and rolled onto its back. And Don Juan yells, "Run for your life!" And Carlos begins to run. But then he turns around and sees Don Juan standing there. Don Juan says, "I think the animal's dead." And they get closer. And the closer and closer they get, the more freaked out Carlos gets. It looks like it has a beak, but the body of an animal. And he's in absolute horror. and his mind is refusing to believe what he sees. And he glances back at Don Juan, and Don Juan is like cool, calm, and collected, and he glances back at the animal, and he realizes what it is. It's just some burnt debris with twigs and leaves gather around it, and he laughs and excitedly explains to Don Juan what it is. And Don Juan was like, what you've done is no triumph. You've wasted a beautiful power, a power that blew life into that dry twig. And then he says, he patted me on the shoulder, and joked that earlier that day I was the person who knew what was real and what was not. And Carlos feels embarrassed. Don Juan says it doesn't matter. The branch was a real animal, and it was alive at the moment the power touched it. Since what kept it alive was power, the trick was, like in dreaming, to sustain the sight of it. See what I mean? And I think the power of it lies in imagination, like how little kids can be so creative and inventive. It's because they can imagine something and they can hold it in their mind or in their mind's eye all day sometimes. Like, kids can go around pretending all day long, and they can look at things and imagine how they might work, and then, tinker with it and find that different ways to make things work. I've noticed that with different toys or different things I've been messing with, where I'm getting nowhere on it, a little kid come up and grab it and tinker with it and figure it out really quick. And I think it's due to that power of imagination. And so I personally have a place of power that I go to, and how Don Juan and Carlos have peyote or mezcalito to trigger opening up to some of these things. I have a thing I do once a year with cyanescens or wavy caps. And a lot of people take these things for, say, microdosing. That's the new thing, microdosing. But I take them once a year. But this was the first time I'd ever done them, and I wasn't actually out in my place of power when I took them. I had taken them maybe a week before, and I realized when I would close my eyes, I can have really powerful visions. And at first, the visions would be like chaotic and uncontrollable. But with practice, I would be able to envision things like the house that I wanted and the car that I wanted, or, hearing things that I wanted, like if I was in a meeting or something like that. I could imagine these things. I wouldn't see things with my eyes open, but when I closed my eyes, I could really visualize some cool things, and all kinds of different things, like things like you might not see in real life. Like, one was a nightclub that was like almost all glass with neon paint running through everything, and even the tables were like, the tables and the floor and the chairs were all like one large, like melted, I guess you could say, piece of glass with neon ink or paint running through them all. And I imagine that on purpose, or like the walkway, the stairs up to my house, things like this. And so get done with that trip, you could say. About a week later, I'm out on this place I call a place of power for me. And I called it a place of power before I went out there and had this experience. I would just go out there and feel really good and practice meditation and visualization and things like this. And I get out there, and it's a storming day, and I look up at the clouds, and I decide I want to cloud watch. And almost immediately I see the Grim Reaper, and this, I'm just imagining this, like, this is like me pointing, like, like you might say, oh, that kind of looks like the Grim Reaper or whatever. And then it was like the Grim Reaper, but made of clouds. And the Grim Reaper notices me back, and comes, the wind kicks up, and he's coming closer, and he's pointing his scythe at me. And I was like, whoa, that's like I knew I was like cloud watching and imagining it, but it was kind of like, it was very, very clear and a powerful like visualization. And so I got kind of frightened. And Don Juan talks about this, like not letting the fright make you lose your vision, or excitement make you lose your vision. And so I didn't know this advice at the time, though maybe I did, because I read some of these Don Juan's or Carlos's books when I was younger, and they've been kind of coming back to me as I read them again. But so I center myself and I ground myself. Imagine sending roots deep into the earth, and just take a deep breath and relax. And it picks up the pace. The wind starts blowing harder, and so the Grim Reaper is coming faster, which scares me a little more. Deep breath, relax. Comes harder one more time, and then turns to the right, or to the, I guess you could say, northeast. And then the clouds, I'm like, oh, that looks like 4 horses. And this is going to be a very cliche like vision for the most part. I've told it to some people, and they're like, yep, lots of people have visions like this or dreams like this. So it turns into 4 horses, and the 4 horses are galloping along. And I think to myself, man, it'd be cool if I could like imagine flying up with them and flying along with these horses. And I kind of imagine that. I imagine my spirit kind of floating up into the sky. And then I look in the sky, and I can kind of see, I can imagine like a person-shaped body of clouds floating with the horses. And then it looks like a big, I guess, a tidal wave or a tsunami comes through. And, oh, wait. Yeah, a tsunami comes through. And, kind of envelops. Oh no, wait. First then the 4 horses turn into 2 lions in the front, and a ram and a lamb behind it, going towards Mount Rainier. And then a big tsunami comes through and sweeps them up, and sweeps me up. And then I'm no longer like flying along with the clouds. It looks like I'm kind of, or the body of clouds, the body in the cloud looks like it's just kind of floating along, and it's limp and being drug along with the waves. And the waves come, and the clouds literally kind of like crash up against the scenery of Mount Rainier, which is actually in the background. Like Mount Rainier is really there. And then like an old like canoe is on riding the wave, and then it turns into like like a galleon or like a pirate type ship, and then it turns into like a battleship, modern battleship, and then it turns into this crazy ship that I've never seen before. And all these things are pushing towards Mount Rainier. The waves or the clouds wrap up to almost to the peak of Mount Rainier, and then from behind the clouds, like a little impish devil-looking thing, pops out, and it's holding a book, and it's like offering me. It looks like it's offering me a book. Again, all imagination. These are like things like if you see a dragon or a sheep in the sky, like I'm like, oh, that looks like this, kind of making up a story in my head as I go. But at the same time, I'm like, no, I would never accept a book from the devil. And then it kind of like raises the book up to its eyes, and then like peeks out from it behind the thing, like, are you sure? Like, it's a good book. And I refuse. And then it turns into Hermes, if you know who Hermes is, or the god Hermes. And I'll describe it to you. It's a man in a toga on one knee, holding, and he's got the helmet with the wings coming off the sides. Oh, and sandals. And he's holding a book above his head, a big book above his head. And I'm like, I don't know. Because Hermes is a trickster, if you know the lore. So I don't know. And then the vision, I end it, and I turn around and walk back home. And my son and I had been looking at two, like, we're going to do a YouTube video for, like, little plays. And one was like a cop and like a guy who's in a jail cell, and the other was Hermes and Pan. And I didn't quite know what Hermes looked like. And this is literally like I get home and 15 minutes later we're discussing which play we're going to do. And we decide it's going to be Hermes and Pan. And so I start looking up what Hermes looks like. And it looks like the guy that I saw, or the image that I saw in the sky. So I think that this has something to do with the power of dreaming. I think I tapped into something that has to do with the power of dreaming. And I've, like, if you watch my older videos, I maybe 2 videos ago I said I've always been a lucid dreamer. My earliest memory is a lucid dream, and I think there is something to that, and that's what Don Juan is getting at with Carlos here. Don't quite know yet. I'm going to have to keep reading and keep practicing to truly know. And then Don Juan is again telling him that he's just reiterating how you make yourself accessible to power. Again, here in the chaparral, but also in the office or in politics or in your peer group, is to speak up and be quiet and know when to do one or the other. And then also, he tells him how he could have maintained, that he should have maintained that vision a little while longer, and how he would have done it would be to stop the world, and which he goes on to explain later on, and I'll go over that one. And he says, Carlos whispers in Don Juan's ear, "What do you mean by stopping the world?" And he said, he gave me a ferocious look before he answered that it was a technique practiced by those who were hunting for power, a technique by virtue of which the world as we know it was made to collapse. And it's another one I've practiced, and it's in an older book. The technique is in one of, I think, Carlos's first books, and I've practiced it and gone over it, and it is a pretty powerful meditation, and it's good just for, relaxing and sensing the world in a different way. That's what I'll say. And then I'll practice more, and then when we come upon that part of this book, I'll make a new video where I show everybody that technique, or at least how I've practiced it so far. Once again, I'm Coach Brian, and this has been I Accessed the Power of Dreaming from Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, do that now. Like, comment, share, and as always, practice. For access to my suggested library, my blog, Northwest Elite Spirit merchandise, and to be personally trained by me online, go to northwestelitespirit.com. Thanks again.